Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views we hope are relevant to you. In today's show, how's the British Labour government already betrayed the very Sikh community it promised to represent? Well, the community are just starting to realise maybe the British Prime Minister isn't quite what they thought he was. We look at how the pathological gene of genocide seems to still exist in the Hindu community even 40 years after their last outrage. And the younger brother of Lawrence Bishnoi is arrested in California. What was he doing there, we wonder? And once again, India's misbehaviour gets highlighted in the mainstream Western media. No wonder the tactics are becoming increasingly desperate and indeed dangerous as they find themselves in the unusual and uncomfortable position of losing control of the narrative. All this and more on today's show. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there. Thanks for tuning in yet again.
Indeed, and James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, as usual, we'll be taking a look at loads of your great comments which have been filling up below the video, so thank you as always for those. Right, James, let's get the show on the road. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
Lawrence Bishnoi's little brother finds himself in trouble in the U.S., Angus. He apparently, when he fled India, they have basically stated that he went through Canada. So he got here on a fake passport and other fake documents and then traveled through to the U.S., where he has now been arrested in California. They claimed that with his false documents, it gave them the premise to make the arrest and hold him without bail. And this is big for India because they have had a red notice on him, excuse me, for some time now and been seeking for the U.S. to make that arrest. Now, he has been, he's been insinuated into investigations of various levels in India, and the latest court cases coming out of Mumbai and other regions, they really wanted to get him into custody and to bring him back to India. Now it seems that the U.S. has given them a special gift. Here, coming up to Thanksgiving, the U.S. is giving them a Thanksgiving gift. Now, he's wanted, as I said, for his alleged involvement in various crimes, including the murder of Punjab singer Moosewali, which we've covered on the show previously, and the killing last month of former Maharashtra Minister Baba Siddique, and also others. So this is going on with the stepped up enforcement and actions by the India authorities to prosecute him. As I said, he's on a non-bailable warrant issued by a Maharashtra court, and that will also transfer to the U.S., where they are going to extradite by the looks of it. Now, of course, there is an extradition process in place, but unlike in Canada, the U.S. is a bit more lenient in what they allow for the evidence and the punishment for individuals to be extradited. Now, within Canada, because we are a non-capital punishment or non-death penalty country, we will not extradite anyone who's arrested here on Canadian soil to a nation where we fear that they may be killed as a result of their convictions on arrival. With the U.S., because they are a capital punishment country, they do not have that limitation in place. So it seems like he really chose the wrong country to get investigated or to be arrested in. But at this point, of course, it looks as though he will be extradited to India, and the India media is just in a feeding frenzy over this on, of course, their continued path to try to discredit Canada and label Canada as a harbor for terrorists. They are claiming, of course, because he made his way from India to Canada with false documents, that we again kind of opened the door to that abuse by the individual to get into Canada. And of course, you know, the questions linger. How did he get into the U.S. With the same fake identity and fake paperwork? Now, this is funny because Anmol turned around and got into the U.S., but he was not arrested at the border. He was actually arrested in California. They had lost track of him, but were sharing all intelligence that they had from India to the US. And it was after there were pictures that surfaced a little while back of him at a wedding in California that drew his actual location, and were able to provide that information to the U.S. authorities to, again, at the end, make the arrest. So we'll be watching this to see how the extradition takes place and what happens once he is taken back into India custody, Angus.
It's interesting that he's ended up in California. I mean, like I said, one does need to ask the question, what's he doing in California? Of course, California has a very large Sikh population, and there has been an awful lot of intimidation against the community, particularly from the the Hindutva forces. And we do know that the Bishnoi gang essentially have acted as proxies for the Indian government to unfold all sorts of criminal activity, violence, intimidation, harassment, etc. Right. And there are, of course, references in that article to that. So yeah, one does question, firstly, why was he in California? What has he been up to? I know he's probably fleeing, at least on face value, he's fleeing Indian justice. In reality, I suspect his mission was probably a little bit deeper than that. I suspect there were other reasons why he found himself in California. And of course, his gang has been linked to all sorts of assassinations, including potentially Nijara as well. And of course, Gurpatwant Singh Panun's assassination plot, one wonders if there was a link to that as well. So, yeah, when somebody like a Bishnoi, a member of the Bishnoi gang, is arrested in the US, yeah, it does raise a lot of questions. What was he doing there? One also has to ask the question, why is India so keen to get hold of him when we do know that there are clear links between the Bishnoi gang and the Indian government, particularly Ajit Doval and Raw and what have you, as again, there's this proxy criminal fraternity link that we often talk about. I wonder if India are desperately keen to get hold of him and take control of him, because of course he will have a lot of the family secrets, won't he? He will know a lot of the dirty laundry of the dealings going on between India, the Indian government and the Bishnoi gang. And I wonder if they're terrified that the fact that if the US law enforcement gets their hands on him, which they have now, that of course US law enforcement might pass him across to the US intelligence services, who of course are trying to unravel this transnational repression plot against Panun and others. One wonders again if India are terrified that Bishnoi might start spilling the beans once again. Again, there could be this quid pro quo, this deal to be done between Bishnoi and the US authorities saying, look, OK, we won't extradite you back to India and face the rest of your life potentially in an Indian jail, but in return for that, we want information. So again, I do wonder if there is a bit of an intelligence operation beneath the surface going on here as well. And one also has to look at this from another angle, this whole story. Again, this is an Indian criminal who's been highlighted by the Indian government internationally. There's been an international arrest warrant issued out to Interpol for him. Now, the US authorities have arrested him and detained him. Now, highlight this or contrast this with Khalistanis. The Indian government have publicly proclaimed Khalistanis not even just as criminals, but as terrorists, even worse than criminals, terrorists. And they have demanded that these so-called terrorists be arrested by the US and Canada and other countries. And yet these countries haven't. So again, contrast this, where the evidence has been presented against Bishnoi, so the US law enforcement have arrested him, as they should do. India have supposedly presented evidence of terrorism against Khalistani protesters, and yet US and Canada authorities haven't arrested them. Why not? Because the evidence is not there. Again, it clearly highlights that there's a very different agenda going on here when it comes to Khalistani campaigners, is that clearly the evidence is not sufficient, claiming that they are terrorists or even criminals. There is no evidence there. If there was, the US law enforcement would have arrested them, and yet there have been no arrests against Khalistani campaigners. Quite the opposite, in that their freedom of speech, their very freedom has been respected and gifted by US and Canadian law enforcement, because there simply is no evidence. All this so-called evidence presented by the US does not exist. It is fake. It is nonsense. So yeah, James, I think this story highlights a lot of different interesting angles to this one. I think let's follow this one, because I think there is an awful lot more to this than meets the eye.
Absolutely. And of course, with the Bishnoi gang activity that's reached transnational proportions, there's a lot of gang activity here. There's a lot of intermixing of gang activity right down the West Coast here, from all the way from Vancouver right down to Los Angeles. So it could be that they have gang interests as well within these so-called gang marketplaces. And it's going to be interesting to watch and see how this all plays out within the India courts, and even throughout the U.S. process, and see where they end up, especially with the accusations of the Bishnoi gang being involved in some levels of this transnational repression that's going on throughout Canada and the U.S. Here he actually, shows his head here on local soil in terms of Canada, and of course down into California. So we'll have to wait and see how it plays out, but it's very interesting turn of events, Angus. With that, though, we'll take a look at, right now there is a new podcast that is out on The Guardian, which we know is quite a large Western news media outlet based over in your neck of the woods, actually, Angus. And they are doing a series that I found very interesting called Assassin, Spies, and a Superpower. And this podcast goes into detail about Hardeep Singh Nijjar, about the Gupta case, about going back right to the history of it all, and looking at the rift between Canada and India that's going on right now. And I found it very interesting, and I've just brought up kind of a summary here of the podcast, but I really encourage people to check it out because I found it very interesting. There are a few things that I personally would have changed on the reporting, but again, I think overall it offers a great summary as to where we are today in Canada-India relations, as well as the fact of the U.S. case there with the attempted assassination and foiled assassination attempt of Mr. Poonen. And this is a huge one because it's really taking on traction of really countering the narrative that India is pushing in the Western media. And of course, we've seen a real push in Canada to try to counter that narrative, but not so much in other nations. So it's good to see we are not the only ones that are taking on the misinformation campaign by India, by the BJP, by the RSS, and by Modi himself and his lackeys. So it was a really interesting listen, and it's about 36 minutes long. So it's not that it's not lengthy, but they did a good job in breaking down the summary points and really driving home the importance of dealing with India as they continue to grow their economy, as they continue to grow their presence in the world and their influence. So it's as I said, I guess it's a really good podcast. I thought it was well done for the most part. There are a few points that maybe I would disagree with, but very few in that. Overall, I think it was a very well done podcast.
Yeah, the Guardian is it sits left of centre. It's been around for a very long time. The Guardian it is more of a left wing news outlet that it's suffered a lot, I would say, in recent decades with the internet. It used to be a very widely read newspaper, a physical print newspaper, but of course with the internet and the way that the media has gone, many news outlets like the Guardian have actually struggled to really retain its readership and actually retain its market share, and certainly its readership has dropped, which is a shame actually. Because a lot of its investigative journalism is actually really very good indeed. As I say, it does tend to sit slightly left of centre, so it always has a slightly left-wing bias to its interpretation of events, but that's not necessarily any bad thing. But one thing I really have to give the Guardian credit for, it has followed this story of transnational repression and supported the Sikh community in a really creditable fashion. And it has actually produced quite regular articles by some of its journalists looking at transnational repression. Followed the Nijjar case, it's followed the Gurpatan Singh Poonen case, and of course here in the UK the Avtar Singh Kandar case. It has actually followed that one very closely, and it has highlighted, of course, all the relevant facts that have come out to do that with that I would say a lot of the other mainstream news outlets have tended to ignore on the whole. I mean, for example, to counterbalance it, the Daily Telegraph is has a slightly larger readership that sits on the opposite side of the fence, on the right wing, slightly right of centre, and that is a bit more of an establishment newspaper. And we talk often about the British establishment, and I talk regularly about this disjoint between the British establishment and the Sikh community, and of course even the British government that doesn't necessarily see eye to eye with the British establishment. I think we're seeing that's certainly currently at the moment. And of course, these lots of evidence of collaboration and collusion between the British establishment and the Indian establishment. So, of course, the Telegraph and the more right-wing newspapers tend to side with the British establishment, and the Guardian tends to be a bit more. It's quite closely allied to the BBC. Now, the BBC itself, I mean, has taken a lot of criticism for being pro-establishment, anti-establishment. I mean, take your pick. It sort of seems to get hit from all sides at the moment. And it's become a bit of a joke that the Guardian readership are very closely allied to the BBC. And the BBC actually sits, it has a very large department in India, so there has of course been, again, quite a lot of relations, should we say, between the British government and the BBC. However, actually, ironically, the BBC has come in for a lot of stick recently, again sitting slightly left of centre from the Indian government when it highlighted, it did an excellent article some time ago criticising the Narendra Modi government and its oppression of minorities. The BBC is well known for sticking up for the minorities, particularly here in the UK, and it did a wonderful article which was absolutely clamped down on by the Indian government. So again, there's a lot of dynamics going on there. So I'm going slightly off topic here, but basically it's to give you the context of The Guardian and how it sits certainly in the mainstream British media. So again, it has been credited on regular occasion with some very, very good articles bringing to the mainstream British audience particularly the issues of the Sikh community and the issues of transnational oppression, and once again this Avtar Singh Kandar issue, which we will not let go away, of course. So yeah, James, I think this podcast is a bit of a new attempt by The Guardian to try and, I think, still retain its audience, to try and obviously grow its audience. Podcasting has become extremely popular, as we know. I mean, it's almost every news outlet is launching its own podcast, etc., etc. So I think The Guardian is doing very well to do this, and it's interesting that it's picked this very topic to launch a podcast. And as you say, it's gone into all sorts of different angles to this topic to fill up half an hour's worth. As you say, it hasn't got everything necessarily right, but I think the very fact that it's launched a podcast that is talking about these issues, I think is very, very good news. It is actually another outlet that the Sikh community needs to look at, and again, try and keep in contact with these journalists at The Guardian, keep feeding them with information, the truth, facts, because of course all journalists need information to produce their material. So again, I would really encourage our audience here in the UK, certainly, to get in contact with The Guardian, email them, send interesting information to these journalists, because it is a machine that needs feeding, and of course they love information, particularly these journalists. They love this information about the transnational oppression and where it's popping up, and any evidence of oppression against the community. So yeah, James, I think this is good news. I think once again it highlights the fact that India's misbehaviour is hitting the mainstream. It is reaching an audience outside the Sikh community, and I think that is critical. That's what matters so much, because that is what is going to get the governments in all of our nations actually on side. It is getting those governments aware of what's going on. The support is coming from other people outside the community, and again, that support is so valuable because it means it's not just a minority voice coming from a minority community, it's coming from the mainstream populations, and that's where it really seems to gain a lot more weight. So as I say, I think this the fact that this podcast has focused on this whole Sikh community issue is a very, very good sign, James.
Yeah, and the podcasting industry is definitely on an upward trajectory. So it really opens up a new level of following and a whole level of listeners that traditional radio, that traditional newspaper, and other media sources have lost. And I think it's a great opportunity for the Guardian to get that out there. But I also think it's a great opportunity for people to learn about what is going on between the Canada and India relations and all of the complexities of these cases that are coming forward now.
Indeed, indeed. Well, let's move on then to my first story. And there's been an excellent article once again in Baz News, and they're highlighting something that we've covered actually on a regular occasion. We of course had the 40th anniversary of the Sikh genocides earlier this month, the outrage that occurred across India, where tens of thousands of Sikhs were massacred. And again, not just murdered, but tortured, set alight. I mean, again, the stories that emerged from that genocide were absolutely horrific. And of course, huge efforts have been made by the community to ensure that the events that happened in 1984 were never forgotten. But of course, this has highlighted on a regular occurrence that the perpetrators of this genocide, of course, came from essentially the Hindu population in India at the time. And again, I would stress, not all Hindus. Many Hindus were credited with trying to protect many of the Sikh families that were literally chased down the streets by these rampaging armed mobs. And many Hindus did provide shelter and safety to many of these Sikh families, so credit to them. But this article that Baz News has written has actually highlighted something that has been picked up by other observers in recent times. And that is actually this belief that this genocidal trait, this almost desire to perpetrate genocide, is almost ingrained within the Hindu psyche. And it's quite a shocking sort of accusation to make, but the evidence still remains. So we'll take a look at this article and we'll go through it in detail, because it does actually bring the story. It sort of rounds up the story with evidence quite nicely. And they're saying that within Sikh philosophy, there is this idea that timing is in the hands of Akal Purak Vaheguru. Things happen when they're meant to. Well, right. When we see that pro-India Hindu nationalist mobs surrounding Gurdwaras in an intimidatory fashion or trying to storm them with weapons during the 40th anniversary of the genocide, many Sikhs will know this was not a coincidence. Of course, referring to these Hindu mobs that have appeared, and particularly around the 40th anniversary of the genocide. And the article continues to say that this mindset, which led to that awful slaughter of Sikhs across India in just those few days, 40 years ago, is still within that community. Now, of course, they do highlight what I just said, is that this trait isn't necessarily ingrained within all Hindus. Many Hindu groups are working with Sikh bodies to challenge the influence of the Hindutva nationalist movement. Of course, again, I think this is an important distinction to make. And again, we talk about this quite a lot, is that you cannot paint all Hindus with the same brush. The trouble is that many of them, a large part of the population, has been influenced and basically indoctrinated by this Hindutva ideology, this RSS ideology, and they have become victims to this indoctrination. But they continue in the article to say, at the same time, the poison of the Indian nationalist Hindu Rashtra ideology has also penetrated the minds of some who identify as Sikhs. Now, this is important again, because we've again talked a lot about what we call these fake Sikhs. Yeah. Essentially, these people from the Sikh community who likewise have been indoctrinated, have been seduced by Hindutva, by the RSS indoctrination. And that is so dangerous, because that is why it has proved so divisive, because it is turning fellow Sikhs against other Sikhs. Nevertheless, right now, it is a wake-up call for the Sikh community that within India's ranks, the genocidal urge to put Sikhs in their place and stifle community dissent towards the BJP and Hindutva and the RSS has existed as strongly as any time since 1984. So what they're highlighting is the fact that the Sikh community needs to wake up. Not just the Sikh community, actually, I would say that India needs to wake up to what's going on here, is that these Hindu mobs are once again being whipped up by Hindutva, by the RSS, to turn on the Sikh community. And one of the most disturbing chants and calls of the pro-India mobs from earlier this month was, "We will remind Sikhs of 1984. So again, and we talked about this at the time, in that violence, even that recent violence against the Gurdwaras, when these armed Hindu mobs stormed the Khalistan protesters and stormed the Gurdwaras, in Brampton and other places, they were chanting in Hindi, "We will remind Sikhs of 1984. Even Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon brought up this very same comment, the same issue, is that they're out there reminding Sikhs of 1984. I mean, how disgusting is that? And let us remind ourselves that in 1984, it wasn't just the murder of Sikhs, the cold-blooded murder. They were dragging women and children outside their homes, their family homes. They were putting tyres around these people and setting light to them. They were murdering children in front of their families. They were gang raping women in front of their families. I mean, again, these acts were inhumane. They were the acts of animals. Even animals don't do that sort of thing. And yet, these mobs recently are saying, we will remind Sikhs of 1984. What sort of people are these that would go out there and chant things like this? Indoctrinated people, that's who. The assassinations of Najjar and Avtar Singh Kandar signify a new level of threat to Sikhs in the West from India's highest ranks. And again, the article refers to recent events. Of course, we talked about Avtar Singh Kandar, but it links to something that, again, we've talked about, which was these Leicester Hindutva riots here in the UK in 2022. And the aggressive street responses to the farmers' protests by Indian nationalists in Canada, which revealed the Hindutva thuggery simmering beneath the surface of Indian diaspora communities around the world. And another recent example that they talk about was in Australia, when Vishal Judd led gangs openly targeting Sikhs who were critical of India. And many of those Sikhs weren't even associated with the Khalistan movement. They just happened to be Sikhs within the Sikh community. And when Judd was finally arrested and convicted and then deported by Australia back to India, he was met with a literal parade. He was celebrated back in India, celebrating his work terrorising Sikhs. And thus far, there is no evidence of any action that India's taken against him for his crimes. So again, it just shows that India, the Indian government, are endorsing, they are validating, basically they are supporting people like this' actions against the Sikh community. And then it goes on to another area which is important to highlight. And we talked about this yesterday, James, about the immigration and diaspora and this increasing immigration, particularly from India. The new wave of Indian migrants into countries like Canada and the UK they've entered with a different mindset and potentially also a specific agenda. So what they're saying here is that in the past, nations in the West have welcomed the Indian community because they have brought an awful lot to our communities here in the West. But more recently, they seem to be bringing a new, subversive and more dangerous agenda with them. The thought that this new wave of pro-India immigrants would attempt to foster such discord and divide in Canada with the assistance of foreign interference, read India, to the point that they could unleash violence in the West, seen during times like 1984 India, seemed far-fetched. Yet, plans to petrol bomb Sikhs and police in Canada were revealed from within Hindus' WhatsApp ecosystems this week. James, you highlighted this fact, that they were talking amongst themselves on WhatsApp how to firebomb, how to petrol bomb the Sikh protesters, how to petrol bomb the police. This is coming from these new immigrants from India, the Hindutva immigrants, that led to 2 arrests. But of course, burning Sikhs alive was a horrific normality in that forsaken first week of November 1984. So again, petrol bombing Sikhs is a deliberate reference to when they burnt Sikhs alive in 1984. It has a particular relevance and link to that. It is deeply, deeply evil. The capability of Hindu nationalists to kill thousands upon thousands of us in Canada, just like they did in Canada, may not be there, but the intention is. Gurdwara groups have made a concerted effort this week to reinvigorate organic Sangat networks, which will supply manpower to coordinate and ensure Gurdwara safety now and in the future. So again, it's a warning out to Gurdwaras essentially across the West now. Be vigilant, remain vigilant, up your security, because as this article argues, this mentality, this mob mentality that has driven genocides in the past against the Sikh community is still there. They are still being indoctrinated, and in fact it's getting worse, that this indoctrination is now ramping up, that the Hindutva forces are deliberately ramping up the violence. They are deliberately trying to increase the violence against the Sikh community by this greater pressure on their own Hindu populations. They're indoctrinating. They are telling them that you must go out there. You must remember 1984. And they are feeding this 1984 mentality, this genocidal motivation, this drive to cause violence and death, to burn Sikhs alive, is being poured into the Hindu community now, saying, turn on the Sikhs. These people who were previously your friends, you must now turn on them. And again, it's almost this Nazi ideology of turning, dividing, controlling mobs to turn on the enemies of the BJP, enemies of the RSS, enemies of Hindutva, and ultimately enemies of the Brahmins. That is what is behind this. It is deeply terrifying. It is scary. This belongs in 1930s Germany, but we are seeing this unfolding yet again here. Firstly in India, now they're trying to spill it out onto the streets of Canada, the streets of the US, and the streets of the UK, James. We've got to keep an eye on this.
Absolutely, Angus. And I think that really drives home an importance of the Khalistan movement to provide a safe, secure, and self-governed nation of Khalistan. And that's not only to basically make up for the fact that they should have had this during the partition of 1947, but it's also about the safety, the security, and the future of the Sikhs as a whole. I think that their survival in terms of their culture, their way of life, their amazing way of leadership to show how you never let somebody stay down. You give them a hand up, and no matter whether they are of Muslim, Catholic, Christian, doesn't matter their faith or religion, everyone is created equal. And I think that really demonstrates the power and the desire, but mostly the need for Khalistan, I think, Angus. It's, another point there is that if you look in Canada, especially here in Surrey, you'll notice an increase in the security at the Gurdwaras. But interestingly enough, you don't see any visible security that's been increased around the Hindu temples or the mandirs. And I think that part and parcel is because of the Hindutva, we know where the threat's coming from and who the threat is focused on. So I don't believe that they see the current threat against the Hindu mandirs as much as we, of course, know it's a reality for the Gurdwaras.
Indeed, and I think it's very evident that law enforcement and certainly the intelligence services across North America and here in the UK will be fully aware of who is behind the violence. They will know that it is Hindutva fomenting violence. They will know that it is Hindutva acting essentially through proxy, through these Hindu mobs, that they are behind this violence. They know that the Khalistan movement is a peaceful movement. If it wasn't, they would have clamped down on it. The fact is that the Khalistan movement is free to express themselves. They have the freedom of speech. They can take to the streets. They can even stand outside mandirs with their Khalistan flags because they protest peacefully. So they are fully aware of where this violence is. The evidence is out there. Even we've picked it up on social media about petrol bombing the Khalistan protesters. That's right. Coming from one community only. That is the Hindu community. The problem, of course, is the narrative and the mainstream media. What is the mainstream media reporting? And I think that's where the real battle is that the battle's been won with the governments and the intelligence services because they know the truth. The problem is it's the mainstream media, and this is where we have a massive role to play, and outlets like us is highlighting the truth, is trying to stamp down on the narrative that's coming out of India that it's all the Khalistan terrorists. No, it's not. It's Hindu terrorism that is the problem. And this is why that this propaganda war is still unfolding. The battlefield is very much the internet, the mainstream media outlets, and that is where that we have to keep fighting this battle to ensure that all the news outlets are reporting the truth. They're not reporting the Indian narrative where it's supposedly Khalistan causing the problem. It is the fact that it is the Hindu mobs, it's the Hindu violent mobs that are chanting things like "Remember 1984." That's where the true danger is coming. So it's that battle continues, James, and we must keep highlighting that.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to move on now to my second story, and we're going to bring the battle across the Atlantic to here in the UK. And there's been a series of articles recently about the British government and the British Prime Minister. The British Prime Minister currently is in Brazil for the G20 summit. And of course, there's been an awful lot of pressure from the Sikh community, particularly here in the UK, to demand that Keir Starmer confronts Narendra Modi, as he will, of course, meet him in Brazil at the G20 summit, to ask about Jagtar Singh Johal and say, well, why is he still in prison? Why are you not releasing him? So all eyes are currently on Keir Starmer, and we're waiting for news from Brazil saying, well, have you talked to Narendra Modi? And what's the news about Jagtar Singh Johal? And so all the organisations here in the UK are waiting with bated breath. They are waiting expectantly for good news and positive news to come from number 10 Downing Street about positive discussions that Starmer had with Narendra Modi. Now, I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek when I say this, because I know what the answer will be. And unfortunately, my view always seems to differ from many of the Sikh organisations here in the UK, who always maintain a completely optimistic view and perspective on this, as indeed they should do. Unfortunately, I am always a little bit more cynical and a little bit more negative, because I tend to sort of look at the bigger picture, and I just see what seems to happen here quite regularly is that the British government always tends to side with the British establishment, which in turn tends to side with the Indian establishment. So forgive my cynicism when I approach this story. However, there is a positive side to all this. And we talk a lot about transnational oppression that's happened here in the UK even. Of course, the story of Avtar Singh Kandar. And the British mainstream media has, and we talked about The Guardian, picked up on transnational oppression and a lot of the Sikh community's issues here. There's another article, and this has come from The Spectator, which actually is linked to what's going on with Keir Starmer and the Jaggi story. And again, the Spectator magazine, it sits on the left wing, so it's slightly, I wouldn't say anti-establishment, but it does hold the establishment a lot more to account than the right-wing press seems to do. And they've come up with a very good article, very short but very good article, once again, looking at Keir Starmer. And it does actually start to reflect my own cynicism about Keir Starmer's government. And again, the Sikh Federation here in the UK have been, again, very high pressured on the British government. They're constantly lobbying the British government about these issues, particularly about Jaggi and transnational oppression, etc. And they've constantly been pressuring the 12 Sikh MPs who sit in the British Parliament. But again, they seem to have been finding that the British government, once they were in opposition, they were very vocal. They're saying, yes, we support the Sikh community. We want your votes because we will stand up and we will represent the Sikh community. Now, the Labour government, Keir Starmer's government, has been in power now for August, September, October, November, 4 months now. And there's been, I would say, a little bit of a deafening silence from the Labour government. Firstly, about Jaggi. Secondly, about transnational oppression. So the Spectator has come up with this article. I'll quickly read through this article. It doesn't take long. British Sikhs blast Starmer's incompetence. Another day, another Downing Street drama. This time, number 10 is in trouble with the British Sikh community after it transpired its social media accounts failed to acknowledge the religious festival of Gurpurb last week. Gurpurb, of course, is celebrating the birth of the first Guru, Guru Nanak Ji. And now over 300 Sikh groups have addressed a scathing letter to the Prime Minister, blasting Keir Starmer's blunder as indefensible. And in the words of The Spectator, oh dear. While the social media accounts of world leaders and political organisations, including the Labour Party itself, marked the 555th birthday of the founder of Sikhism, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, from Downing Street, there was nothing but deafening silence. Yeah. Oh dear, Keir Starmer has remained silent about it. Again, very vocal in opposition, but once he's elected, And the article continues, the rather unimpressed community has now come together to slam the PM's slip-up. The Sikh Federation leader, Debinderjit Singh, a regular guest on our channel, I might add, fuming about the government's show of incompetence on the matter. In his letter to Starmer, he raged. When you were the leader of the opposition, you put out excellent Gurpurb messages. But this oversight will be seen by many in the Sikh community that our community is being taken totally for granted now that you're in power. I'm sorry, Debinderjit, I hate to say I told you so, but I think the community's faith in Keir Starmer has been a little bit misplaced. Don't forget, they are politicians. They are stained with political morality.
Yeah.
They're very loud in opposition to garner your votes, but once they're in, they come under the wing of the British establishment. So I think your optimism was a little misplaced, and I hate to say I told you so, Dabinderjit. So the Spectator continues, shots fired. Indeed, they have been. Singh went on to warn the PM of electoral consequences, claiming there would be thousands of Sikh constituents who will find it impossible to defend your oversight as Prime Minister by not putting out a message on Gurpurb and reassuring the Sikh community about their safety and security. He noted ominously, a public apology for forgetting the Gurpurb of Guru Nanak Dev Ji and a promise that the same mistake will not be repeated will simply not be good enough. Ouch, in the words of the Spectator.
Yeah.
And then the Spectator continues, actually having a go at Keir Starmer. It's not the first time Keir's crowd has been careless on the cultural front. Observers of Diwali, the Hindu festival of lights, don't consume alcohol during the occasion, while the majority of Hindu communities will only eat vegetarian food. Yet, just weeks ago, Steer Pike, that's part of this news outlet, they revealed that the number 10 had opted to serve both alcohol and meat at this year's Big Diwali Bash, much to the chagrin of Hindu attendees. Downing Street did eventually apologise for the mix-up, but only after days of furious criticism in the Indian and British press. And then it finishes the article, if there's anything the last few months of the Labour government has demonstrated, it's that Starmer's army can't seem to get anything right. OK, yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a bashing at Keir Starmer. And absolutely well deserved. But I think there is a more serious note to all this, and I think as I keep cynically referring to, and it's a shame for Dabinderjit Singh and the Sikh Federation, and of course all the whole community who have kept faith in Starmer's government, and of course even Jaggi's brother Gurpreet, who's lobbied Starmer and David Lammy, our British Foreign Secretary, about Jaggi. I think your faith has been misplaced. Your optimism is completely laudable, but it is not surprising that this British Labour government has betrayed the community. I mean, why are you surprised? Because we knew full well in opposition, of course, they would promise all sorts of these huge promises. We will represent the community. Yes, you vote for us and we will stand up. We will promise that we will lobby Narendra Modi to release Jaggi. Well, 4 months later and still a deafening silence. And of course, this whole thing about the first Guru's birthday, it's a huge thing in terms of an oversight for Keir Starmer, but in the grand scheme of things, with all due respect to the first Guru, it's pretty minor compared to actually the bigger issues of things like this transnational repression and the murder of British citizens on British soil, and I mean that in terms of current day-to-day relevance. That is something that Keir Starmer should be absolutely stamping on. Never mind his cultural failure in terms of recognising the Guru's birthday. Again, it's a pretty sacrilegious oversight. But the more relevant thing to today is the fact that British citizens are dying on British soil. Why is he not actually acting upon that? So again, forgetting the Guru's birthday is symptomatic of a deeper problem there, and is the fact that Starmer's government do not care. They genuinely do not care about the Sikh community. They don't care about Sikh issues, because if they did, you would have started seeing results now. You would have seen the language being a lot more robust and forceful. Instead, you're seeing diplomatic language. Now, fine, you can say, well, that's what they have to do. But that's what we heard from 14 years of the Conservative government, from David Cameron, from Boris Johnson. All of them came out with that same sort of diplomatic language. It's fine, because it's diplomatic language, that's the way it's supposed to be done, but judge them on the results. The results were nothing. After 14 years of conservatism, 4 months of the Labour government, you're seeing already backtracking. It's following the same trajectory. It is the same trend. The British government will betray you because they have no desire to confront Modi. They have no desire to stand up to the Indian establishment. Why? I don't know. That is the big question. But why is the British establishment so aligned with the Indian establishment? That is the big question that remains unanswered. We try to answer it on regular occasions, but unfortunately your optimism has been misplaced. Keir Starmer will not produce results. I hope to God that I will be proved wrong, and I will metaphorically eat my hat if he brings Jaggi home. But I think the expectations are that he will fall to his knee, as he has often been seen to do. He will fall to his knee in front of Narendra Modi. I can bet that nothing comes from Brazil and the G20. Unfortunately, I will hate to say it, that I will no doubt be sat in the same seat in due course reporting another failure of Keir Starmer's government to bring Jaggi home, to bring to account the Indian government for the murder of British citizens on British soil, Avtar Singh Kandar, to hold to account Narendra Modi for transnational oppression and the oppression of the Sikh community here in the UK. I look forward to being corrected on that. I look forward to being proved wrong, and I hope to God I am proved wrong. Time will tell, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because we've also noticed that it's been pretty quiet on the front of the U.S. government when it comes to transnational repression, about, the Gupta case and other things from a federal level. But I think that actually might be a benefit to the long term. And the reason I say is because I think that if the Biden administration was to take on that giant right before leaving office, I think that it would just incentivize Trump to ignore it, to move on from the Biden administration actions or inaction. So I think that in a way, I think that it really sets up a good opportunity to put pressure on the Trump administration when they take office to actually take a look at transnational repression and to really deal with it. And I think that they will. I don't think that, all of this talk about borders and about national security and the U.S. first, I don't think that this is going to go unanswered once the Trump administration gets in there, Angus.
Indeed, I think you're right. And what I would say, though, and what does seem to work, is that governments only move when they are pressured to do so. They will only act when they have no choice. They will always take this path of least resistance, as I often call it. So it is very much up to the grassroots to keep the pressure on, keep that political lobbying going, keep the political pressure upwards, keep pushing up through all your representatives, whether it's through the organisations, the Sikh organisations and community groups, or whether it's through your local MPs or whatever, is get out there, get into the streets, get that voice heard, get the Sikh community's voice heard in the mainstream as much as possible. And I'm going to wrap up the news items today with a final article. And this is, and I'd say this is a brilliant effort down here in the UK, actually, by the community. And again, the Sikh Federation highlighted this, is that in Slough, down in the southeast of England, just outside London, is that the community got together and they did this. This is outside the Sri Guru Singh Sabha in Slough, and I'm going to play you a quick video of this.
The Indian government has not been gracious enough to apologize. Here are 20,000 people, innocent people who lost their lives, and not one man has been imprisoned so far. So how can they forget? It rankles in the minds of the Sikh.
जुल्म भरी ये राजनीति विच 47 दे 1 तो 2 कर गई हल्ले तक तां सी साडे जख्म अल्ले ते विच 84 दे खून फेर कर गई हो कर याद रोवे रूमाना ते जिना घरां दियां डोरां ढो तुर गई ते जिना घरां दियां डोरां ढो तुर गई.
So there you go. Well done to the community in Slough. Obviously a large Sikh population around Slough, and they've actually gone out there with vans. They've produced these vans with these big banners reminding people, in fact not even reminding, educating people who won't even know what happened in 1984 in that area. And they're just driving around with those vans saying no politics, just humanity, 1984 genocide. So again, this is all about raising awareness, and all that's going to do is get people outside the community to say, what happened? What was this 1984? Again, it's just a very simple mechanism, but it's very, very effective because it gets people to ask the questions, it raises the visibility of the community, and it gets people outside the community to most importantly, ask what happened in 1984, who was behind it, and therefore, of course, it then links through to what's going on today. So this simple lobbying out in the streets, very simple but very effective, James.
Absolutely, Angus. I think it's a great tactic because it really gets, when the billboards are rolling, they definitely capture a lot more attention than stand still or standalone billboards. So I think it's a great tactic to really raise awareness. I think that the slogan is very brief but very poignant in getting the whole point across.
Indeed. I don't know what route they took, but if they head up the A40, is the A4 or the A40 in that area, I'm sure they'll get tens of thousands of people seeing those billboards. So well done to the community there. Right, okay, James, let's move on now to our comment section as time marches on. Now, one of our regular correspondents, Permjit Singh, has, and in fact we did talk about this recently, he's actually launched a petition. I just wanted to spend just a quick moment just highlighting his petition about the alcohol consumption that seems to be on the increase in Punjabi films. So it's I think it's the early days of this change.org, and actually I think this may only be open to British citizens. I may be wrong, but anyway, take a look at it. I'll put a link in the section, the description section below the video for today, and I'll link through to this change.org petition. But this is designed, and the title is "To Stop the Gratuitous Alcohol Consumption by Sikhs and Punjabis in Films. Support Punjabi and Sikhi." So please, for those of you in our audience, particularly those of you here in the UK, please have a look at that petition, get your signature on it. And again, it's just to highlight the fact, as per a story that we highlighted a little while ago, is that it has been this trend to normalise the consumption of alcohol and even drugs in a lot of films. A lot of Punjabi filmmakers, particularly on the female side, a lot of women now are being shown on film to consume alcohol and even drugs. So there is a petition to try and pressure filmmakers to stop this normality, or normalising this thing, which obviously goes against the fundamental tenets of Sikhi. So thank you, Permjit, for that, and we hope we see a lot more signatures on that petition. Right, James. Achar Singh Gill commented, "Modi has led his followers to believe that the Indian Parliament House is a temple of democracy." I think quite often we tear down that temple on a regular basis verbally. And India is the mother of all democracies. And I think, as you rightly say, the mother of hypocrisy, more like. Absolutely. 2/3 of parliamentarians have criminal backgrounds. I think that might even be an understatement, James.
I think that's so well said, though. It drives the point home, doesn't it, Angus?
It does indeed. And I think actually, and also I'm just cringing slightly because I'm just now picturing, I haven't seen the pictures yet from the G20, but I have no doubt there will be pictures of Narendra Modi in Brazil at the G20, shaking hands with all these Western leaders, smiling. And of course, he will be hailed as this leader of the world's largest democracy. And yet we all know the complete nonsense of that. And we don't need to highlight yet again just what an absolute utter hypocrisy that is. And it just saddens me to see so many world leaders shaking hands with Modi and ignoring his human rights abuses. So thank you, Achar Singh Gill, for summarising what we all know there. Now, Jat Gabru says, "Of course these videos are fake. India's been doing this since 1984. I think this is an important point, Jez. I think this has highlighted the fact, look, it's not just recently. They've been faking the narrative since, at least 1984. Because, of course, during the terrible attack on the Ahmadiyya Sahib, what did the Indian government do? People forget this. Before they launched that military assault on the Ahmadiyya Sahib in 1984, they actually got hold of all the journalists in the area, Western journalists, even BBC journalists, Mark Tully being one of them. They actually essentially forced them onto buses. They then drove those buses to the border and dropped them off, basically stranded them at the border, and then launched the attack on the Ahmadiyya Sahib to make sure that the press could not report on that dreadful, unforgivable assault on the Ahmadiyya Sahib, which then murdered Bhindranwale over that 4-day assault. So again, they've been controlling the narrative since at least 1984, and in fact a long time before that, James.
Absolutely. And, it's been something that's been ongoing as they point out from 1984, but I mean, the misinformation and the falsehoods have come out from there even prior to 1984, with the information that led up to it, all of the things that came together to combine that explosive situation that happened with the Sikh genocide and other events.
Indeed. Now, Raj Karig Khalsa says, look, Canada knows about Modi and the RSS hatred against the Sikhs, and that's why Trudeau pointed out, and this goes back to that article where I said the Indian media had cherry-picked, had picked a certain part of Trudeau's sentence where he said, well, Khalistanis don't represent Sikhs as much as Hindutva doesn't represent the Hindu population. Yeah, you're right. It says, this is why Trudeau pointed out Modi's Hindu supporters being separate from the whole of Hindus in Canada. Yeah, basically, Trudeau knows the truth. He knows full well. It's not just Trudeau. The Canadian law enforcement and the Canadian intelligence agency sees this. They know full well that the Hindutva forces, they're not part of the whole Hindu population. Of course, the ordinary Hindus are not part of that whole thing, but they certainly know that it's the Modi supporters, these indoctrinated Hindutva people, who are the real problem in Canada. And Sikh organisations have to sit with Canadian authorities and point out these fake materials. Absolutely they do, James.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show that even in Canada, we're seeing a backlash of falsehoods online, false media things. And just reminded me of something today that was put online that people were calling for the deportation of Jagmeet Singh, who was actually born and raised here in Canada. So where they're saying deport him to his home country. Well, this is his home country, but it just shows the level of ignorance out there that's really being peddled. And yes, Canada is aware of it. Our politicians are calling it out. And of course, we're going to continue watching it here, Angus.
Indeed, it's the evils of the right wing. They know how to influence. It's not the right wing; it's the extremists. I've got to be careful with my language here. It's the extremists who are the danger, because it's very easy to influence people who are more in the centre. It's very easy to influence with fake videos, as we've pointed out. And a prime example of this, actually, and this is an example that I often trot out, is that 20 odd years ago, maybe even 30, 25 years ago, here in the UK, there was a lot of vigilante action against paedophiles. And one of our newspapers on the right wing really whipped up the mob without realising just how dangerous the mob had become. And the mob started turning on, and there was actually an attack, and I don't think it was a murder, but it was certainly a violent attack against a paediatrician, because they thought this paediatrician was a paedophile, because the thick mob couldn't distinguish the difference between a paediatrician who's a doctor for children and a paedophile. But that is the mentality that we're dealing against. That's the problem that we have. And likewise, as you point out, James, is that these idiot mobs who are ranting, let's deport Jagmeet Singh, because they don't have the mental capacity to sort out the truth from the fiction. And that's what we're up against, James. We've got to be so careful here. And this is why we've got to keep campaigning to get the truth out there. So let's move on.
Hardal, so this Jagmeet running Canada, I think you do an amazing job, but we'll move on from that.
Indeed. Hardal saying, and reminds me, yes, and I think, this is a bit of an ongoing conversation. Swaranjit Singh Khalsa was somebody that I did interview, in fact, because you requested I interview Swaranjit, and I'd said I did interview Swaranjit, and that was, as you rightly point out, it's actually probably 6 months ago. Time flies, my apology, I didn't realise it had gone so quickly. And I thank you for the reminder. I will get in touch with Swaranjit, and I think maybe it is timely that I have another chat with Swaranjit. I think I'll get in touch with him. We do correspond every now and again. He does send me the odd piece of information, so I will get in touch with Swaranjit, a very interesting gentleman and a very high achieving gentleman, based in Connecticut in the US. So thank you for that, Hardal. Mankind says Hindutva genetically believes disinformation, conspiracy, fake propaganda. Yes, they do. And I think, again, this comes back to what we were talking about earlier. And again, I think this is, it is genocide ingrained in the Hindu gene. I think it's a very dangerous discussion, that, because it's a very complex situation. I don't think you can brand, as we keep saying, you cannot brand all Hindus with the same brush. The trouble is of course, the genocidal trait does always come from the Hindu population. But again, it's only a part. And I think, again, it is only those who are more inclined to be easily influenced. I referred to them as sheep yesterday. And of course, all communities have their sheep amongst them. They are those who are easily influenced. We see it regularly in all sorts of issues, not just religion or politics or whatever. It is just that there is a large part of every population who are easily influenced. And I think that is where this genocidal sort of rollout seems to gain traction. But I think you're right in saying it's Hindutva who are the core, the hardcore. They are the extremists. Yeah. It's the Hindutva that are the extremists. That is where we must target what we do. And the whole community must target the real core. This is the head of the snake. It is Hindutva who genetically believe this disinformation. Well, actually, no, they don't believe it. They generate it. They actually those who generate it. So again, I think maybe what I'm trying to say here is that the Hindu sheep are those who are genetically inclined to believe it, but it is Hindutva that are those who generate it. They are the source of this disinformation, this conspiracy, this fake propaganda, James.
Absolutely. And, unlike cancer or other things, I don't believe that hatred and such is genetic. I think that it is learned through generations, being passed down through verbal or other ways. So, but as for genetically, I don't believe that part of it. But again, it's so important that, as you said, Angus, we really keep a focus on who it is that's perpetrating all of this disinformation and this anger and this violence. And it's not the overall Hindu community. It's a small part, and it is the radicals or, the outliers. So.
Indeed. Amrit Saravar says, this is a slightly ambiguous comment, but they say that's exactly why the Khalistani dreamers are fighting for Khalistan. They know this is the only way to save their dying farmers. Now, this comes back to this discussion we've had about the Punjabi farmers, the agricultural industry in the Punjab. And when you refer to Khalistani dreamers, I don't know which side of the argument actually you sit on this, but I think you do raise a very good point, is that actually, yeah, this is the reason why Khalistani dreamers are dreaming of Khalistan, for this very reason, is that the farmers are dying, whether it's through suicide or just the fact that they cannot survive commercially, is because Delhi has complete control, essentially, certainly indirect control of the farming industry in the Punjab. And those small farmers who are fighting to survive, who are fighting a subsistence level of survival, they are being driven out of business by New Delhi because the Modi government, the BJP government, want to drive them out of business so that those farms can then be mopped up and bought out by their corporate friends. And once the corporations have control of industry, it basically, certainly of the agriculture industry, it basically means that all that money, that finance gets channeled back up to that ruling elite. It means they control the food chain, etc., etc. There is no good argument for corporate ownership of farming. There is an argument of efficiency, but it comes at a huge price, and that price is too much to pay, James, I would say.
Absolutely. And we've talked about it before, all the international aid that's coming into India to help modernize and automate some of the farming systems. But of course, that's not being sent down to the individual farmers. It's going again to the big corporate conglomerates that are trying to take over the land.
Indeed, and I think this whole dream of Khalistan needs to be a reality, simply for what this is one reason amongst many, but for this reason alone justifies the establishment of Khalistan, because it basically means that this massive, vital natural resource that is situated in the Punjab, the agricultural industry, it can be then managed by its own people, it can be managed by its own government. And its own government can then manage it much more efficiently for the benefit of the people of Punjab. They can export it, so it will be for the benefit of the people of India. And it does mean that the farming will be much more efficient, it will be better resourced, it will be better managed, and therefore the yields, the crop yields will be massively better. And of course, the management of the water resource will support that. So therefore, everybody benefits, everybody wins. The people of the Punjab, therefore the people of Khalistan benefit, and by extent, the people of India benefit, because it means that that grain, the harvest, the crops can then be sold in a higher quantity to the Indian people. So everybody wins in that argument, James.
Absolutely.
And the final comment of the day comes from UK. May God bless you for showing India government's true face. Thanks and thanks. Well, thank you to you for that comment. And again, a huge thank you to all our commenters and all our audience for your continued support. We still remain demonetized, but we still fight on. We still battle on to keep bringing you, our audience, the truth. Your part to play in this is massive, because we can't do this without you. So please do get out there. Tell others, tell people around you, your friends, your acquaintances that we exist. Keep your comments coming in, because it does help the algorithm on YouTube to spread the truth further afield. So do continue that support. Do keep your comments coming in. We do appreciate everything that you bring to our attention. Thank you for your emails. We've received loads of emails with loads of really interesting links and information and news items. They really do help us keep things going. So thank you for those. Don't forget, you can continue to contact us at message@satlogetv.com on anything you'd like to bring to our attention. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching once again. It is a goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.